March 1940. Britain's accountants were calculating how long the country could endure, and the numbers revealed the threat more terrifying than any German bomb. Admiral Karl Donitz's U-boats were wiping out 300,000 tons of merchant shipping in the Atlantic every month. The Royal Navy could count only 200 escort vessels to protect convoy routes that stretched thousands of miles across hostile seas. Winston Churchill, barely 2 months into his position as First Lord of the Admiralty, drafted a memo that cut straight through naval tradition. We need hulls, not sophisticated ships in 2 years. Hulls in the water now. The obvious answer gleamed in every British shipyard: destroyers. They embodied everything the Royal Navy understood about surface warfare. They could make 36 knots, carried 4 4.7-inch guns, possessed quintuple torpedo tubes, and had enough firepower to engage enemy capital ships. They were masterpieces of engineering and complete financial ruin. Each cost £200,000 in 1940 money, roughly £45 million today, and required 18 months of specialized labor. Even operating at maximum capacity, Britain's 7 major naval yards could deliver perhaps 30 destroyers per year. Meanwhile, merchant ships were vanishing in real time. By May 1940, France was collapsing and the U-boat threat was intensifying. Into an Admiralty meeting walked naval architect William Reed, carrying blueprints that immediately provoked skepticism. His design wasn't military at all. Reed had spent the 1930s creating the Southern Pride class, commercial whaling ships built for Antarctic waters. They were simple, rugged vessels made from off-the-shelf steel and using techniques familiar to any coastal shipyard. They were slow, cramped, visually unimpressive, but each one cost £20,000 and took only 8 months to build. That tenfold cost difference wasn't accounting, it was revolutionary. For the price of a single destroyer, Britain could put 10 corvettes to sea. In the 18 months needed to build 3 destroyers, British yards could launch 20 corvettes. Reed's idea reframed the entire equation. Not, how do we build the perfect submarine killer, but how do we put enough ships in the Atlantic that U-boats cannot avoid them? Commander George Creasy, Director of Anti-Submarine Warfare, understood immediately. The Royal Navy didn't need floating superweapons, it needed presence. Constant, overwhelming, unavoidable presence. Every convoy had to be shielded by layered screens of escorts that deny U-boats safe attack angles. Destroyers were scalpels. The Atlantic required a sledgehammer. On July 25, 1940, while the Battle of Britain raged overhead, the Admiralty placed orders for 58 corvettes, soon designated the Flower class. They were named after garden plants: gladiolus, bluebell, campanula, an intentionally humble gesture. Traditionalists protested that Britain was sacrificing excellence for mass. These ships barely reached 16 knots, half the speed of a destroyer. They mounted a single 4-inch gun compared to a destroyer's broadside. Their anti-submarine weapon was little more than depth charges rolled off the stern. None of that mattered when the alternative was empty ocean and defenseless freighters. By September 1940, as shipping losses climbed toward 450,000 tons per month, the first corvette, HMS Gladiolus, completed her trials. She looked nothing like a proper warship. She would help save Britain all the same. Admiral Karl Donitz's doctrine was refined since 1936. Traditional submarine warfare treated each boat as an isolated hunter. Donitz created rudimentary, wolfpack tactics. A lead U-boat shadowed a convoy and reported its position while sister boats converged. Once 6 or 8 subs encircled their prey, they attacked simultaneously from multiple bearings, overwhelming the escorts through sheer coordination. The mathematics were merciless. A lone destroyer could pursue 1 U-boat, maybe 2. But 6 attacking from 6 angles forced the escort to sprint endlessly between threats while cargo ships burned. On October 18, 1940, Convoy SC-7 learned this in blood. 43 merchant ships left Sydney, Nova Scotia with only 2 escorts. 5 U-boats found them south of Iceland. By dawn, 21 ships were at the bottom. The escorts never stood a chance. They couldn't be in 6 places at once. Churchill grasped this geometry perfectly. In his first major address as Prime Minister, he coined the phrase Battle of the Atlantic, the only campaign he admitted truly frightened him. Britain imported 55 million tons of supplies per year. Losing that lifeline meant starvation or surrender within months. The Royal Navy had 200 escorts in September 1939. Donitz had 57 U-boats, with production accelerating to 30 per month. The corvettes didn't defeat wolf packs through superior performance. They won through sheer numbers. Donitz's tactics depended on outnumbering the escorts. What happened when convoys suddenly carried not 2 escorts, but 8, 10, or 12? The arithmetic flipped. When a wolf pack formed around convoy HX-155 in September 1941, it ran into HMS Gladiolus, Bluebell, Campanula, Nasturtium, and 4 more corvettes forming a tight defensive ring. When U-boats attempted coordinated surface attacks, corvettes met them everywhere, forcing them underwater, where they lost speed, situational awareness, and the coordination wolf packs needed to kill.
The pack dispersed. This marked a philosophical revolution in naval warfare. For centuries, British naval doctrine focused on the superiority of individual ships, build a better vessel, and defeat the enemy in single combat. The corvette concept embraced the opposite approach: build adequate ships in overwhelming numbers and win through saturation. It was profoundly un-British, almost industrial in its cold logic, and senior officers despised it. Admiral Dudley Pound declared the early corvettes scarcely fit for purpose. Individually, he was right, but collectively, they became unstoppable. Between October 1940 and March 1941, 30 corvettes entered service. Merchant losses continued to rise, the happy time for U-boat crews. But the underlying trend was changing. Each new corvette narrowed the escort gap. By May 1941, 89 corvettes patrolled the Atlantic, and the average number of escorts per convoy had tripled. U-boats still found prey, but coordinating attacks became exponentially more difficult. The cheap, rugged little ships were hunting back. The blueprints that Smith's Dock Company unveiled in August 1940 showed a vessel 205 feet long with a beam of 33 feet. Dimensions lifted almost directly from the Southern Pride whaling ships. Naval constructor William Reed had not designed a warship. He had taken a proven commercial hull, removed the whaling gear, and bolted on military fittings. The Admiralty's specifications were deliberately primitive: reciprocating steam engines instead of modern turbines, riveted construction instead of welded plating, a single-screw propeller. Every decision centered on one requirement: any shipyard in Britain must be able to build these using existing skills. This changed everything. Destroyers required specialist yards with heavy slipways, precision machine shops, and workforces trained to naval standards. Only 7 British yards possessed these capabilities. Corvettes needed none of it. Smith's Dock in Middlesbrough, Hall Russell in Aberdeen, Harland and Wolff in Belfast. Even small commercial yards that usually built coastal freighters received contracts. The Flower-class design used commercial-grade steel plating, standard merchant ship rivets, and components already being mass-produced. Reed later admitted he had deliberately simplified the design so that a yard building fishing trawlers could switch to corvettes within weeks. The engine choice demonstrated this perfectly. Destroyers used Parsons-geared turbines, producing 40,000 shaft horsepower, spectacular machinery that required specialist foundries and 9 months to manufacture. Corvettes were given triple expansion reciprocating engines producing 2,750 horsepower, essentially Victorian-era technology, scaled-up versions of mechanisms used in railway locomotives. Britain already manufactured hundreds of them for merchant ships, tugboats, and industrial machinery. They were sitting in warehouses ready to be installed instantly. Construction times reflected these choices. At John Crown and Sons in Sunderland, corvette hulls took shape using methods unchanged since the Victorian age. Riveters worked in teams of 4, heating rivets until they glowed, driving them through pre-drilled holes, flattening them with pneumatic hammers. The process was loud, labor-intensive, and slow by modern standards. Yet Crown's workforce knew it perfectly. On November 12, 1940, they laid the keel of HMS Campanula. By June 3, 1941, just under 7 months later, she completed sea trials. Compare this to HMS Jervis, a J-class destroyer laid down at Hawthorne Leslie in August 1937. Her construction required turbine components manufactured in 3 separate factories, bespoke electrical systems, and fire control machinery assembled to thousands-inch tolerances. She commissioned in May 1939, 21 months later, consuming 300,000 man-hours of highly skilled labor. Jervis was superior in every category, but she was one ship. In the same 21 months, British yards produced 47 corvettes using the same labor, spread across less specialized workers. Smith's Dock alone ultimately built 42 Flower-class ships, launching a new corvette every 17 days at peak output. The Admiralty had consciously chosen to sacrifice perfection for volume, wagering Britain's survival on whether quantity could compensate for quality. The destroyer HMS Electra, commissioned in February 1939, embodied everything the Royal Navy believed about modern naval warfare. Steam turbines propelled her at 36 knots. 8 4.7-inch guns provided formidable firepower. Her ASDIC could detect submarines at 1,500 yards. She cost £250,000 and required 18 months to build. She was magnificent, a ship capable of dominating any tactical engagement. On February 27, 1942, Japanese destroyers sank Electra during the Battle of the Java Sea. Britain lost £205,000 of investment and 18 months of irreplaceable construction effort in 7 minutes of combat. HMS Glowworm, HMS Hardy, HMS Hostile, destroyers worth nearly £650,000 combined, were gone by June 1940. The Royal Navy began the war with 184 destroyers. By December 1940, 35 had been sunk or written off. Each loss represented colossal sunk costs that could never be recovered. Corvettes flipped this equation with brutal efficiency.
HMS Gladiolus cost £20,000, 1/10 the price of a destroyer. When U-568 torpedoed her on October 16, 1941, Britain lost a ship, not an irreplaceable strategic investment. 7 weeks later, Smith's Dock launched HMS Heliotrope as her replacement. The entire cycle took less time than building a single destroyer. This economic resilience mattered enormously. Between 1940 and 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic destroyed 47 corvettes. Replacing them cost a combined £940,000. Replacing 47 destroyers would have required £9.6 million and monopolized British shipyards for 3 full years. The time factor was even more decisive. In September 1940, monthly merchant losses exceeded 450,000 tons. Britain needed escorts deployed immediately. Camel Laird began building HMS Opportune, a destroyer, in July 1940. She did not commission until August 1942, 25 months later. During that same period, British yards completed 127 corvettes. Each hull could escort convoys, hunt submarines, and deny donuts the empty ocean his wolf packs required. Opportune was superior to any corvette. But she wasn't available when Britain needed protection the most. Strategic planners faced this dilemma constantly. Resources that produced 1 destroyer could yield 10 corvettes.
Did 10 adequate ships provide more value than one excellent one? The Atlantic delivered a clear answer: yes. Convoy defense was not about winning individual tactical duels. It was about denying U-boats the opportunity to attack at all. A destroyer could sprint at 36 knots to one endangered sector, fight brilliantly, and destroy the threat, but 3 other sectors would remain exposed. 10 corvettes, however, could form overlapping defensive zones that prevented U-boats from reaching firing positions in the first place. Admiral Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches, quantified this in December 1941. His command required a minimum of 300 escort vessels for adequate convoy protection. At destroyer production rates, reaching that number would take 8 years. At corvette rates, 18 months. Britain had nearly achieved it already. The fast destroyer remained tactically superior. Strategically, it was irrelevant. Wars are not won with perfect weapons that arrive too late. They are won with adequate weapons available at the moment of crisis. Aboard HMS Gladiolus in November 1940, able seaman Ronald Rundle discovered why veterans called corvettes halfway to hell ships. The vessel rolled 40 degrees to port, paused, then slammed 40 degrees to starboard, completing the cycle every 8 seconds. This wasn't a storm. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in force 6 winds, conditions the North Atlantic produced 3 days a week. Rundle and 2/3 of the crew spent the watch vomiting. The remaining men had stopped eating entirely. The violent rolling came from design compromises. Adapted from whaling ships, corvettes had a 6-to-1 length-to-beam ratio, short and round. This made them extraordinarily seaworthy and almost impossible to capsize by weather. It also made them roll brutally in anything rougher than calm water. Destroyers cut through waves. Corvettes rode over them, corkscrewing through every axis. Living conditions made matters worse. Gladiolus carried 85 men in accommodations designed for 47. The forward mess crammed 40 sailors into a space 30 feet by 20. When Atlantic swells rose above 15 feet, seawater entered through ventilation ducts.
Clothes never dried. Mold covered everything. Lieutenant Commander Henry Chesterman reported that 60% of his crew suffered from saltwater boils, skin infections caused by wet wool uniforms rubbing raw flesh. The cold was relentless. Corvettes lacked proper heating. Small cold stoves provided warmth, but officers banned their use during U-boat alerts because smoke created visible plumes. Men stood 4-hour watches in temperatures hovering just above freezing. Frostbite was routine. In January 1942, the medical officer aboard HMS Bluebell treated 12 frostbite cases during a single crossing. Speed created tactical nightmares. Corvettes' engines pushed them to a maximum of 16 knots in calm seas, usually 12 in Atlantic swells. U-boats on the surface could make 17 knots. Corvettes could not catch submarines on the surface. They could only force them to dive and then attack with depth charges. Commander Donald McIntyre watched helplessly as a U-boat shadowed his convoy from just beyond effective range. His corvettes plodded along, unable to close the distance, crews exhausted, soaked, freezing. Yet these miserable ships performed. Throughout 1941, corvettes spent more days at sea than any other vessel type, averaging 240 days annually compared to 180 for destroyers. They couldn't outrun U-boats, so they outlasted them, maintaining constant presence. Crews functioned while perpetually seasick, sleeping in wet clothing and standing watch in conditions that would break morale aboard more comfortable ships. Those men saved Britain anyway. HMS Gladiolus achieved her first kill on March 16, 1941, U-47, commanded by the legendary Gunter Preen, who had penetrated Scapa Flow in 1939 and sunk HMS Royal Oak. Preen was stalking convoy OB-293,
southwest of Iceland. Gladiolus detected him with Azdic at 1,400 yards, closed despite heavy seas, and dropped 14 depth charges in a diamond pattern. U-47's hull imploded at 180 feet, taking Preen and 45 crewmen with her. Germany lost one of its most celebrated aces. Britain lost depth charges that cost £8 each. The statistics mounted. HMS Bluebell sank U-651 in June 1941. Campanula destroyed U-74 the same May. Narcissus accounted for U-568 in October. By December 1941, corvettes had sunk 19 confirmed U-boats, more than all British destroyers combined in the same period. The difference wasn't tactical brilliance. It was operational arithmetic. Destroyers spent 60% of their time in port. Corvettes, with their simple engines, remained at sea 70% of the time. More sea days meant more encounters. More encounters meant more kills. The engagement pattern became predictable. If a U-boat spotted a corvette on the surface, it would dive immediately. Once submerged, it lost its 17-knot surface speed and crawled at 7 knots. Corvettes now held the speed advantage. They would quarter the area, pinging with Azdic, forcing submarines to stay submerged and drain battery power. Eventually, the U-boat either surfaced into gunfire or remained below until depth charges found it.
Commander Peter Gretton described the approach as terrier tactics. We couldn't outrun them, so we outstayed them. HMS Gladiolus herself was lost on October 16, 1941. Torpedoed by U-568 south of Iceland, she went down in 4 minutes, taking 80 of her 85 crew with her. Between 1940 and 1945, 47 Flower-class corvettes were destroyed. Each loss claimed an average of 65 lives. Yet Britain continued producing replacements faster than U-boats could sink them. The final accounting, published by the Admiralty in 1946, revealed the scale of their contribution. Flower-class corvettes took part in actions that destroyed 294 U-boats, 47 solo kills, and 247 shared. No other Allied warship class came close. Destroyers sank 174 U-boats. Frigates accounted for 187. Aircraft destroyed 386, but corvettes still held second place despite being the least capable vessels in the fleet. Technically, the exchange rate was strategically decisive. Britain lost 47 corvettes, worth a combined £940,000. In return, those ships helped destroy 294 U-boats, valued at approximately £16 million. Each Type 7 U-boat cost £55,000 to build. Germany also lost 15,000 trained submariners, irreplaceable specialists requiring 9 months of intensive training. Donut's U-boat force never recovered. The slow, unglamorous corvette had crushed Germany's U-boat arm by being numerous enough and persistent enough that superior German submarines could not avoid them. Quantity accomplished what quality alone never could. The final invoice reached the Treasury in August 1946. 267 Flower-class corvettes at £20,000 each, plus 151 Castle-class variants at an average cost of £31,000, for a total of £10.1 million, just 2.8% of Britain's total wartime naval expenditure. For that modest sum, the Royal Navy acquired the ships that kept the Atlantic lifeline open long enough for American industrial power to turn the tide. Now, consider the alternative. Suppose Britain had relied on destroyers for convoy escort. Each convoy required at least 8 escorts. Britain ran roughly 300 convoys per year between 1940 and 1945. Maintaining those escort groups
would have required approximately 3,000 destroyers at 200,000 pounds each, a cost of 600 million pounds, 60 times the corvette expenditure. Where did that 590 million pounds in savings go? Operation Overlord cost Britain 190 million pounds. The Mediterranean campaign consumed 140 million pounds. Strategic bombing operations required 315 million pounds. Combined, these major campaigns cost roughly 645 million pounds. The Corvette program's savings almost covered all three simultaneously. By choosing adequate ships over perfect ones, Britain preserved the industrial capacity to fight on multiple fronts instead of bankrupting itself to guard a single maritime corridor. Merchant losses peaked at 768,000 tons in November 1942, when Donitz nearly severed the Atlantic lifeline. But by May 1943, losses had dropped to 264,000 tons, while U-boat losses had surged, 41 destroyed that month. Donitz withdrew his wolf packs on May 24, 1943, conceding that he could no longer sustain the attrition. On June 1, 1943, Western Approaches Command counted 187 corvettes in operational service, compared to 94 destroyers. These corvettes provided the numerical density that transformed convoy defense from desperate reaction to systematic coverage. No convoy sailed unescorted after mid-1941. Most carried 8 or more escorts. By 1943, U-boats faced overlapping ASTIC screens, coordinated depth charge patterns, and escort groups that outnumbered attacking wolf packs. The true cost comparison was not 20,000 pounds versus 200,000 pounds per hull. It was 10.1 million pounds purchasing a strategic victory versus 600 million pounds leading to bankruptcy. Britain entered the war as the world's largest creditor nation and emerged as its largest debtor nation. An additional 590 million pounds spent on destroyers would have made the debt unmanageable, likely forcing Britain into a compromised peace by 1943, especially when American aid came with stringent conditions. The Corvette program, dismissed by naval traditionalists as inelegant, bought something beyond measure: Britain's continued ability to wage war until unconditional victory. The humble Flower-class ships, with their commercial origins and civilian-grade construction, saved not only convoys, but Britain's capacity to remain in the fight.